The first time my CEO said I wasn't leadership material, it wasn't private. It was during our Fortune 500 executive strategy meeting, 42 floors above Manhattan, glass walls, polished table, 12 people who controlled billions in shareholder value. I was midway through presenting the risk-adjusted integration model for our largest acquisition in company history. He didn't even let me finish the slide. "Laura," he said, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You're incredibly thorough. But leadership requires instinct. And frankly, you're not leadership material." A pause. Then a soft ripple of laughter around the table. Not loud. Not cruel. Just enough. I stood there holding the clicker, heat rising up my neck. I had built two of our highest margin divisions. I had negotiated the European expansion that analysts called impossible. But in that room, none of it mattered. He turned to the board chair. "I'll be restructuring the acquisition committee. Laura won't be involved moving forward." Just like that. Removed. Demoted without the word being spoken. I nodded once, sat down, and didn't argue. That was what surprised him. I didn't defend myself. I didn't push back. I didn't blink. But as the meeting continued, I noticed something he didn't. Our CFO never looked at me again. And when the meeting ended, my phone vibrated. A calendar invite. No sender name. Location, off-site, private dining room. Time, tonight. 7:30 p.m. I didn't recognize the number attached. But I recognized the timing. And for the first time that day, I smiled. The private dining room overlooked the river, discreet and soundproof, the kind of place executives use when they don't want transcripts. When I stepped inside, I wasn't greeted by anyone from my company. It was Daniel Reeves, Senior Portfolio Manager at Blackridge Capital, our largest institutional shareholder. He stood, shook my hand once, firm but not performative. "Thank you for coming, Laura." "No sender name," I replied. Bold. He gave a thin smile. "So, is removing your lead strategist mid-acquisition?" Straight to it. Dinner arrived untouched while he asked questions that weren't casual. Debt maturity schedules. Covenant triggers. Short-term borrowing layered under integration costs. Specific line items buried in footnotes most investors never read. "Off the record," he said finally, lowering his voice, "why does your CEO believe leverage at this scale is responsible?" I chose my words carefully. Because if the acquisition closes before the covenants tighten, the stock spike masks the exposure. Daniel didn't look surprised. "We've increased our monitoring position," he said. "And some of us are questioning operational judgment. Some of us." Plural. He slid a folded document across the table. "A breakdown of our current ownership structure, annotated. Hypothetically," he added, "if leadership had to change, would you run it differently?" The question wasn't flattering. It was strategic. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked one of my own. "How fluid is your position?" Daniel leaned back. "Fluid enough. When I left the restaurant, I checked after-hours trading. Our stock was down 2.1%. Small. But someone had started selling. And it wasn't retail." The demotion email arrived at 8:12 a.m. the next morning. "Effective immediately, Laura Bennett will transition to special strategic initiatives." No explanation. No acknowledgement of the acquisition model I'd built. Just exile with polished wording. My access permissions changed within the hour. Certain financial dashboards were restricted. Forecast modeling tools grayed out. Integration war room credentials revoked. They moved fast. But not fast enough. Months ago, anticipating political shifts, I had exported archive projections, time-stamped before any access revocation. I forwarded the files to a private encrypted drive I maintained for contingency planning. That afternoon, from my new glass-walled office on a lower floor, I opened the debt schedule spreadsheet. Short-term bridge financing layered under long-term notes. Adjustable rate triggers tied to EBITDA thresholds we hadn't hit in 2 quarters. And there it was. A maturity cluster. 90 days after projected acquisition close. If earnings underperformed by even 3%, we would breach a covenant. Which meant accelerated repayment. Which meant liquidity strain. Which meant public disclosure. The narrative wasn't growth. It was timing. The CEO wasn't betting on fundamentals. He was betting on speed. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. One-sentence text. You were right to question leverage. No name attached. But I recognized the area code. Blackridge Capital. They weren't just monitoring. They were positioning. And suddenly, being removed from the acquisition committee didn't feel like punishment. It felt like insulation. The quarterly earnings rehearsal was always theater. We sat in the executive conference room, scripts printed, slides polished, language engineered to sound confident but not arrogant. I had written half the growth narrative 2 months ago. Now I was there as an observer. When the leverage slide appeared, I spoke carefully. If analysts ask about short-term maturities, we should be precise about timing. The CEO didn't look at me. We'll manage the message. That's not what I meant, I said evenly. If EBITDA softens even slightly, the covenant threshold. He cut me off with a small, dismissive wave. Laura, you're no longer in strategic decision-making. Let's let leadership handle positioning. The word leadership hung in the air like a reminder. No one defended me. But I noticed something else. The general counsel shifted in his seat. The head of investor relations stared down at her notes. After rehearsal, I checked my phone. An analyst note had leaked early. Concerns around aggressive leverage structure tied to pending acquisition. By market close, our stock was down 4.3%. Not catastrophic, but deliberate. Someone credible had questioned us. I walked past the CEO's office on my way out. His door was shut. Voices inside. Sharp. Controlled. My phone buzzed again. A short email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, EBITDA sensitivity, revised scenario. Attachment included. I opened it. It was my original model, adjusted with stress variables I hadn't circulated. Only 3 people had that file. And I hadn't sent it. The call came from Thomas Hale, one of our longest-serving board members. He'd voted with the CEO on every major initiative for years. Loyal. Predictable. Laura, he said, voice low. Do you have 20 minutes? We met in his private office at headquarters, blinds partially drawn. He didn't offer small talk. I reviewed your original acquisition model, he began. Not the revised one presented to the board. I held his gaze. And? You assumed moderate growth and conservative integration costs. Yes. The CEO's version assumes acceleration in both revenue and margin expansion. It does. Thomas folded his hands. Which scenario do you believe is defensible? There it was. Not which is optimistic. Defensible. The conservative model protects liquidity, I said. The accelerated one protects optics. Silence stretched between us. He stood and walked toward the window. If this acquisition underperforms, we're exposed. Yes. And if we breach covenants? Board liability increases. So does activist pressure. He turned back slowly. Hypothetically, if confidence in leadership weakened, would you step in? The question wasn't emotional. It was procedural. I don't step into chaos, I replied. I step into control. A flicker of something crossed his face. Respect? Calculation? Before I left, he said one final thing. Voting dynamics aren't static, Laura. As I walked back to my floor, my assistant hurried toward me, pale. Blackridge just requested an unscheduled governance review call. Not earnings. Not performance. Governance. And that meant only one thing. Control was being evaluated. 6. HR never calls you in for good news at a Fortune 500 company. The email was brief. Laura, please come to Human Resources at 2 p.m. regarding a leadership concern. Leadership concern. The irony almost made me smile. When I walked in, the head of HR and a compliance officer were already seated. A printed document lay between them. There's been a complaint, HR began carefully. Allegations that you've been undermining executive unity by communicating alternative acquisition risk assessments externally. Externally. I kept my posture relaxed. With whom? We're not at liberty to disclose that. Of course not. I understood what this was. A warning shot. Documentation. The first brick in a narrative that painted me as destabilizing. I've shared no confidential information outside approved channels, I said evenly. If you'd like my devices audited, I'll cooperate. That surprised them. The compliance officer shifted. This is informal. Just be mindful of optics. Optics again. As I left the room, someone caught up to me in the hallway. Maya Chen, head of compliance's deputy. Quiet. Meticulous. Not political. She handed me a thin folder without breaking stride. You didn't get this from me, she murmured. Inside were vendor consolidation agreements tied to the acquisition integration plan. 3 contracts highlighted. All approved directly by the CEO. All routed outside standard procurement review. I stopped walking. Why? I asked quietly. She didn't look at me. Because governance reviews don't happen for no reason. And then she was gone. Back in my office, I closed the door and spread the vendor contracts across my desk. The consulting firm was called Northbridge Advisory Group. Clean branding. Generic website. Minimal digital footprint. Annual billing, $18.7 million. Scope of work, strategic integration facilitation. No competitive bidding documentation attached. I cross-referenced the corporate registration. Registered agent address matched a residential property in Connecticut. Property owner, Michael Carrington. The name meant nothing until I checked the CEO's disclosed affiliations. College roommate. Listed years ago in a biographical interview. My pulse didn't quicken. It sharpened. The contract wasn't illegal on its face. Related party transactions weren't uncommon. But undisclosed related party transactions during a leveraged acquisition were combustible, especially under institutional scrutiny. I forwarded the registration documents to a secure external drive. Then my phone rang. Blocked number. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, a text followed. You're digging in the wrong direction. No signature. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the board disclosure archives. There was no mention of Northbridge in any governance filing. None. Which meant one of 2 things. Either the CEO had disclosed it verbally and avoided paper, or he hadn't disclosed it at all. My email pinged. Subject: Governance Review, Executive Attendance Required. Mandatory. Tomorrow morning. And suddenly, this wasn't about leadership material anymore. It was about fiduciary exposure. The leadership dinner was scheduled weeks in advance. Top 50 executives, private dining room, soft lighting, rehearsed laughter. Optics of unity. I almost didn't go. But absence signals weakness. Halfway through the second course, the CEO stood to give a toast. He spoke about bold vision, decisive leadership, and knowing when to elevate the right voices. Then he looked directly at me. And knowing when certain voices are better suited for operational depth rather than executive altitude. Scattered chuckles. He raised his glass. To leadership. Glasses clinked. Eyes avoided mine. I smiled. Calm. Unbothered. I even lifted my glass. Because humiliation only works if you react to it. My phone vibrated against the tablecloth. A text from Daniel Reeves. We're increasing our position. Quietly. Filing threshold soon. I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. Increasing position meant accumulation. Accumulation meant leverage. Leverage meant pressure. Across the table, the head of investor relations leaned closer to me. Have you spoken to Blackridge recently? Why? I asked lightly. They've been active. Active. The CEO resumed his seat, satisfied with the room's energy. He believed he'd reinforced hierarchy. What he didn't know was that hierarchy is fragile when ownership shifts. As dessert was served, I excused myself and stepped outside onto the terrace. I opened after-hours trading. Volume spike. Unusual block activity. Not dramatic enough for headlines, but deliberate enough to matter. When I returned inside, the CEO caught my eye. He looked victorious. I looked patient. The CFO requested the meeting at 6:40 a.m. Not on company calendar. Not in the executive wing. We met in a conference room 2 floors below mine, blinds closed. He looked exhausted. Laura, he began, rubbing his temples, I need to ask you something off record. That's rarely good. He exhaled slowly. If Q3 underperforms by even 2%, we breach the debt covenant. I know. His eyes lifted sharply. You ran that scenario? Months ago. He swallowed. The CEO believes post-acquisition market enthusiasm will offset the exposure. It won't, I said calmly. Not if analysts are already modeling downside. He leaned forward. If this collapses, the board will demand accountability. Yes. And the acquisition model carries your name. There it was. The architecture of blame. He revised the assumptions, I replied. You approved them. His jaw tightened. Under direction. Silence settled between us. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because fear changes loyalties. He hesitated, then said quietly, Blackridge requested direct financial clarifications yesterday. Not through investor relations. Through me. And? They asked about contingency leadership. The room felt smaller. If this implodes, he continued, voice low, they won't protect him. I stood. They won't protect you either, I said. He didn't argue. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. Email notification. Private equity firm subject line. Preliminary interest, governance alignment required. They weren't asking about performance. They were asking about control. The private equity call was scheduled under the guise of industry dialogue. Translation. Quiet evaluation. I took it from my apartment, skyline dim behind me, laptop camera angled deliberately neutral. 3 faces appeared on screen. No small talk. We've reviewed your company's leverage profile, the managing partner began. There's an opportunity window forming. For whom? I asked. For whoever moves first. They weren't interested in advisory work. That became clear quickly. We're exploring a structured secondary accumulation, he continued. Contingent on governance reform. Governance reform. Meaning removal. You'd need board alignment, he said. And credible leadership ready to step in. The implication hung between us. If you back a transition, I said carefully, you're not buying a trade. You're buying stability. He nodded once. Can you secure votes? There it was again. Not can you lead. Can you secure votes? I don't pursue action without math, I replied. And the math isn't public yet. A pause. Send us your assessment, he said. Privately. After the call ended, I stared at the city lights. Private equity doesn't gamble on emotion. If they were circling, they'd sensed blood. Minutes later, I received a market alert. Our stock was down another 3% on unusual volume. And then a second alert. Form 13G filing pending. Blackridge had crossed disclosure threshold. Ownership wasn't just shifting quietly anymore. It was about to become visible. The restructuring announcement came at 9 a.m. sharp. Company-wide email. Corporate tone. Strategic realignment to optimize efficiency ahead of acquisition integration. 300 roles eliminated. 2 divisions consolidated. Mine among them. I read it twice. Not shocked. Just measuring intent. The CEO followed with a live town hall. Confident. Controlled. These changes ensure we have the right leadership structure moving forward. Right leadership. My direct reports messaged me privately. Are you okay? Is this retaliation? Should we start looking? I responded calmly. Stay focused. Document everything. Because restructuring is never just financial. It's political. By noon, analysts had reacted. Cost-cutting signals liquidity concern, one report read. Our stock dipped another 2%. Cumulative decline now meaningful. Late afternoon, I was summoned to the CEO's office. He didn't offer a seat. You've been very active lately, he said. In what sense? Investor conversations. External noise. I speak when asked. His eyes narrowed. Be careful you don't mistake access for authority. Authority. Interesting word choice. I stood. Authority follows ownership. He didn't like that. As I left, my phone buzzed again. Text from Daniel Reeves. We've crossed 9.2%. Others aligning. Others. Plural again. I opened the updated ownership breakdown. Institutional shifts. Quiet but deliberate. And for the first time, I saw the outline of something tangible. A coalition. Not majority yet, but no longer theoretical. And coalitions change outcomes faster than speeches ever do. The call came at 10:47 p.m. Thomas Hale didn't waste time on pleasantries. If someone accumulated 12% quietly, he said, voice steady, would that change your calculus? I didn't ask who. If he was calling this late, the information was sensitive. It depends on alignment, I replied. Assume alignment, he said. Assume dissatisfaction with execution risk. 12%. Combined with Blackridge's 9.2%, that was already over 21%. Add passive funds that followed governance signals, and voting math began to tilt. Are we discussing theory, I asked, or reality? A pause. Let's say a legacy holder is reconsidering loyalty. Legacy holder meant one of the founding family trusts. Quiet. Deep pockets. Historically deferential to the CEO. If confidence in leadership erodes publicly, Thomas continued, the board must appear decisive. Appear? I asked. He didn't flinch. B. There it was. Would you step forward, he asked, if the board requested interim stability? Interim. Temporary. Safe language. I don't serve as a placeholder, I said evenly. If I step forward, it's to correct trajectory. Silence. Then, understood. Before hanging up, he added one more line. Voting dynamics are shifting faster than he realizes. After the call ended, I opened the shareholder registry update. A block transfer had occurred through an intermediary trust. Percentage undisclosed publicly. But internally, it matched 12. And suddenly, this wasn't just about questioning leadership. It was about replacing it. My executive assistant resigned the next morning. No warning. No transition period. I received another offer, she said softly, standing in my doorway. Double compensation. From inside. I asked. She hesitated. Yes. That was answer enough. They wanted calendar access, she continued. They asked me to flag any external investor meetings. To forward summaries. Surveillance. Not paranoia. Structured observation. I declined, she said. That's why I'm leaving. I respected her for that. Thank you for telling me, I said. Keep documentation. After she left, I shut my office door and powered down my company laptop. If they were monitoring internal systems, then internal systems were useless. I switched to a private encrypted device and began mapping the ownership landscape manually. Blackridge, 9.2%. Legacy trust via intermediary, approximately 12%. Passive funds, fragmented but influenceable. Private equity, positioning, not yet disclosed. Cumulatively, approaching a meaningful block. My phone buzzed. Blocked number again. This time I answered. You're escalating beyond your lane, a male voice said calmly. My lane? I asked. You're not built for this level of conflict. I almost laughed. Leadership isn't comfort, I replied. It's math. Silence. Then the line disconnected. Within minutes, I received an internal email notification. Executive communications under legal review. He'd ordered scrutiny. Good. Because once legal gets involved, records get preserved. And preserved records tend to surface. Especially when governance reviews are already underway. The private equity term sheet arrived encrypted. Subject line, governance contingent participation. No branding. No logos. Just numbers. They were prepared to fund a structured secondary purchase through staggered block trades, routed across multiple intermediaries to avoid early market panic. Their condition was clear: board-level reform within 60 days. Reform. Corporate language for removal. I reviewed the proposed capital commitment twice. The scale was aggressive enough to influence voting power, but disciplined enough to avoid triggering a hostile takeover narrative. They weren't looking for spectacle. They were looking for inevitability. I joined the call that evening. If this proceeds, I said, there will be scrutiny. We expect it, the managing partner replied. But markets reward decisiveness when governance risk is evident. And if the board hesitates, then the market won't. Direct. Calculated. Final question, he added. Are you prepared to assume executive authority if the vote shifts? Not interim. Authority. Yes, I said. There was no hesitation in my voice. When the call ended, I received a market alert. Another quiet block trade had cleared. 4%. expire undisclosed. But the timing aligned perfectly with our conversation. The pieces weren't just aligning. They were moving. And momentum, once visible, becomes difficult to contain. The acquisition roadshow was supposed to project confidence. Instead, it exposed fracture. I wasn't invited to present. My slides, the ones I built months ago, were delivered by someone else. I watched the live investor webcast from my office. Halfway through, an analyst interrupted the CEO. Given recent governance concerns and leverage exposure, why isn't Laura Bennett presenting the integration framework? Silence. Brief. Sharp. The CEO smiled tightly. We've realigned leadership responsibilities. Was that voluntary? The analyst pressed. The head of investor relations shifted in her seat. I could see it even through the webcast. Leadership decisions are internal, the CEO replied. The question lingered. Markets react to hesitation. By the end of the call, social finance platforms were buzzing. Why sideline lead architect? One post read. Stock dipped another 3%. Cumulative decline now undeniable. My phone lit up with messages from division heads. Investors are asking about you. Blackridge wants separate follow-up. Separate. That word mattered. An hour later, Daniel Reeves called directly. Perception is shifting, he said calmly. We're fielding inbound questions. About the deal? I asked. About leadership stability. I leaned back in my chair. And your position? We increase when conviction rises, he replied. And conviction doesn't follow arrogance. After we ended the call, I checked the trading volume. Another accumulation spike. Not loud, but coordinated. For the first time, I could see it clearly. This wasn't a defensive maneuver anymore. It was a campaign. And campaigns don't stop halfway. The CFO's resignation hit the wire before market open. Stepping down for personal reasons. That phrase always means one of two things, pressure or exposure. I received the internal memo at 7:12 a.m. By 7:20, pre-market trading had already reacted. Down 2.8%. He called me once before issuing the statement. They needed a stabilizing gesture, he said quietly. And I was the cleanest one. Did you volunteer? I asked. A pause. No. Which meant he'd been asked. Or cornered. By 9 a.m., analysts were revising notes again. Leadership volatility increases risk. Governance scrutiny intensifies. Then at 11:43 a.m., my encrypted device pinged. Confirmation notice. A 4% block trade had officially settled. Cleared through a consortium vehicle. Beneficial ownership undisclosed publicly, but I knew the structure. It matched the private equity allocation model. I updated my internal spreadsheet. Blackridge, 9.2%. Legacy Trust, 12%. New Consortium, 4%. Total aligned influence? Over 25%. Not majority, but no longer symbolic. At 2 p.m., the CEO requested I come to his office. This time, he offered a seat. Strange timing, he said evenly. Resignations. Market shifts. Accumulation patterns. I held his gaze. You think I'm responsible? I think, he replied slowly, you're more ambitious than you appear. That's not ambition, I said. That's preparation. His jaw tightened. You're playing a dangerous game, Laura. I stood. Only for someone losing control. The legal notice came at 6:30 p.m. Executive communications subject to internal review under directive of the CEO. Broad. Aggressive. They were combing through emails, calendar entries, device logs. Good. Because once legal activates preservation protocols, nothing disappears cleanly. The CEO called me again that night. Private line. Are you building something against me? He asked directly. No pretense this time. I'm building value, I replied. You've been meeting investors without clearance. They requested clarity. You're overstepping. No, I said calmly. I'm responding. Silence on the line. You think the board will back you? He asked. I think the board backs math. And what does the math say? I didn't answer that. Because the math wasn't theoretical anymore. It was trending. After the call ended, I received a secure message from Thomas Hale. Emergency governance session likely within 2 weeks. Be ready. 2 weeks. That was faster than expected. Minutes later, another alert flashed across my screen. Compliance had flagged the Northbridge advisory contracts for formal internal inquiry, which meant the related party exposure was no longer rumor. It was process. And process is difficult to silence. I leaned back in my chair and reviewed the ownership map again. Still not majority, but close enough to pressure, close enough to destabilize. And once instability enters leadership, authority starts to crack. The only question now wasn't whether the vote would happen. It was when. The compliance memo went to the entire board at 8:02 a.m. Subject line: preliminary review, related party vendor disclosure. No adjectives. No accusations. Just documentation. Northbridge Advisory Group. $18.7 million in contracted services. Direct executive approval. No formal disclosure in governance filings. By 9:15, my phone was vibrating nonstop. 2 board members requesting clarification. One asking whether the services had competitive bids. Another asking if the CEO had recused himself from approval. He hadn't. At 11 a.m., an emergency governance call was scheduled for the following week. Publicly, the CEO framed it as routine. Internally, the tone shifted. He walked into my office without knocking. "You've been feeding compliance," he said flatly. "I don't control audits," I replied. "You're weaponizing governance." "No," I said calmly. "Governance is surfacing itself." His composure slipped for half a second. "This is administrative oversight," he insisted. "Nothing material." "Materiality is determined by shareholders," I said. "Not you." He stared at me like he was trying to recalculate. By afternoon, Blackridge had formally requested expanded disclosure around executive-related vendors. Institutional pressure. Documented. My encrypted phone pinged again. Daniel's message was short. Governance matters to markets. I updated my ownership model. With passive funds likely to follow institutional signals, influence was climbing. Still not majority. But sentiment? Sentiment was turning. And once sentiment turns, votes follow. The emergency board session felt different. Not louder. Quieter. Quieter is worse. The CEO presented first, calling the Northbridge issue procedural miscommunication. He emphasized strategic value delivered. He framed it as operational urgency during acquisition planning. Then Thomas Hale requested the floor. Was there written disclosure to the full board regarding the vendor's ownership ties? He asked evenly. The CEO hesitated. It was discussed informally. Is there record of that discussion? Another board member asked. Silence. That was the crack. Not guilt. Absence of paper. After the session adjourned, voting blocks began to surface informally. 2 members expressed temporary confidence. 3 requested independent review. 1 abstained from comment entirely. That abstention mattered more than support. In the hallway, Thomas caught up to me. "You're closer than you think," he murmured. "How close?" I asked. "Close enough that one more shift changes the room." I checked my phone before getting into the elevator. A filing update alert. The 4% consortium stake had disclosed partial alignment with a governance advocacy vehicle. Translation: not passive. Active. Blackridge's 9.2%. Legacy Trust's 12%. Consortium 4%. If even 2 passive funds tilted with institutional momentum, the CEO's plurality evaporated. As the elevator doors closed, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Single-sentence text. "You don't have the votes." I didn't reply. Because numbers don't argue. They compound. And I could feel the compounding accelerating. The acquisition financing stalled 3 days later. Not publicly, not yet, but internally, the banks requested revised covenant sensitivity scenarios. That was banker language for doubt. At 8:30 a.m., the head of corporate finance sent a brief note. Lenders require updated EBITDA stress testing prior to final commitment. Stress testing. The word alone signaled fragility. By noon, 2 analysts downgraded us from buy to hold, citing leadership distraction and governance uncertainty. The stock slid another 4%. Cumulative decline now impossible to dismiss. The CEO called an executive huddle. This is coordinated noise, he said sharply. External actors exploiting temporary volatility. No one challenged him. But no one looked convinced either. When the meeting ended, he stopped me at the door. "You're enjoying this," he said quietly. "I don't enjoy instability," I replied. "I calculate it." He leaned closer. "If this acquisition fails, you fail with it." "That depends," I said evenly, "on who's still leading when the dust settles." That night, I received confirmation from the private equity managing partner. The final allocation tranche is prepared. Execution window within 10 days. 10 days. If it cleared before the next board vote, majority leverage became real. The CEO believed the pressure was temporary. What he didn't see was that timing had shifted. And once timing shifts, momentum accelerates beyond speeches. The governance session reconvened under formal agenda, executive performance review. That language alone was seismic. Thomas introduced the motion calmly. Given material governance questions and market reaction, a structured leadership assessment is prudent. The CEO actually laughed. "Based on what?" he asked. "Speculation." "Based on documented vendor exposure," another board member replied. "And stock decline tied to strategic communication," added a third. The tone wasn't hostile. It was clinical. That was worse. Voting math surfaced quietly during side conversations. The CEO still held a narrow plurality through long-standing allies. But plurality is not protection. It's delay. As the session paused for recess, my phone vibrated. Secure message. Transfer scheduled. 9 a.m. clearance tomorrow. No sender name. I didn't need one. If that tranche executed, ownership alignment would swing nearly 9% in one movement. Enough to erase plurality. Enough to tip into majority influence when combined with institutional votes. The CEO approached me near the window overlooking the city. "You miscalculated," he said softly. "You don't have the votes." I held his gaze. "Not yet," I replied. The CEO spoke first. "This is activist theater," he said sharply. "Temporary accumulation exploiting volatility." Thomas responded without raising his voice. "The accumulation represents over 30% aligned influence, with institutional support signaling governance concern. 30% aligned, before counting passive funds that historically followed Blackridge's lead." The CEO looked around the table, recalculating faces. "This is a power play," he said, eyes landing on me. "Yes," I answered. I didn't whisper it. I didn't soften it. "Yes." Silence fell heavier than any accusation. Another board member cleared her throat. "Given the related party inquiry, market deterioration, and ownership shift, we must consider leadership stability." The CEO leaned forward. "You'd replace proven leadership during acquisition?" "Proven?" Thomas asked evenly. Voting ballots were distributed. No theatrics. Just procedure. One by one, directors marked their decision. The general counsel collected them. Counted. Recounted. Then looked up. "The motion for executive removal pending fiduciary investigation carries." Not unanimous, but decisive. The CEO didn't look at the general counsel. He looked at me. "You orchestrated this." I met his gaze without flinching. "No," I said calmly. "I calculated it." And in corporate governance, calculation wins more often than volume ever does. By 9:32 a.m., the formal statement was drafted. Effective immediately, the board of directors has voted to remove the chief executive officer pending investigation into fiduciary disclosure matters. Laura Bennett has been appointed interim chief executive officer. Interim. A word designed to calm markets. But everyone in that room knew interim was procedural. The private equity vehicle had already filed its governance alignment letter. Blackridge had issued a supporting statement emphasizing confidence in operational continuity. Continuity. That was the narrative. The CEO stood slowly. "This is short-sighted," he said, voice tight. "You're destabilizing the company over administrative nuance." Thomas responded evenly. "We're stabilizing it." The general counsel handed the CEO a packet outlining next steps: restricted system access, compliance supervision, immediate surrender of executive credentials. He turned to me one final time. "You think you've won?" I didn't answer that. Because winning isn't about removal. It's about aftermath. At 9:45 a.m., the press release crossed the wire. By 9:47, financial news alerts lit up. Fortune 500 leadership transition amid governance review. At 9:59, I walked into the boardroom again. Same glass walls. Same polished table. But this time, I took the seat at the head. At 10 a.m., the opening bell rang. And the market began to respond. The stock opened up 6%. By 10:15, it was 9%. By noon, 11%. Analyst notes shifted tone almost instantly. Decisive governance action restores investor confidence. Leadership transition may de-risk acquisition integration. Markets don't reward ego. They reward clarity. I spent the morning on back-to-back calls, Blackridge, passive fund managers, lending banks. The message was consistent. We would reassess acquisition pacing. We would strengthen covenant transparency. We would suspend related party vendor engagements pending investigation. By 2 p.m., lenders confirmed revised financing terms, conditional but cooperative. Stability was returning. Not because risk vanished, but because control was visible. Late afternoon, I passed the former CEO's office. Compliance officers were inventorying devices. His nameplate had already been removed. For a moment, I stood there. Not triumphant. Measured. 42 floors above Manhattan, the skyline looked exactly the same as the day he told me I wasn't leadership material. Only the math had changed. At 4 p.m., I reconvened the executive team. Some avoided eye contact. Others didn't. I didn't reference the insult. I didn't reference the laughter. I simply opened the meeting and said one sentence. Leadership isn't volume. It's control. No one laughed this time. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.